Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Major reports emerging today that the similarities between last year's Mercedes W14 and this year's Red Bull RB20 are not limited to what we saw at the reveal a couple of days ago. Reports say that in the first major upgrade of the season around Japan time, Red Bull will bring Zeropods to this year's RB20. Is this to embarrass Mercedes and show that they can make work what Mercedes tried and failed to do over the last couple of seasons, or are Red Bull flying too close to the sun and they'll run into the same problems that Mercedes suffered with for the last couple of years? Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. First of all though, we've got a lot to say on Christian Horner. So many updates occurring overnight, including the Wall Street Journal going as far to say that these accusations were made by Horner's assistant, so that's quite surprising in its own way, you can argue. But also, we've got pressure being mounted on Red Bull from other of their partners. We believe the Austrian side of Red Bull wants Horner gone. The Thai side of Red Bull wants Horner to stay. And, well, they're all at odds at the moment, and it's an absolute mess, it seems, behind the scenes. However, the Thai side of Red Bull would likely change their mind if serious partnerships were potentially at risk as a result of this, because Ford, upcoming engine partner with Red Bull for 2026, Mark Rushberg of Ford said the following: as a family company that holds itself to very high standards of behaviour and integrity, we expect the same from our partners. He goes on to say the following: it appears to us, and what we've been told was that Red Bull is taking the situation very seriously, and of course they are worried about their brand as well, which is, you know, quite telling really. It's not necessarily about the allegations, it's not necessarily about, you know, the effect that this has had on the employee that has brought these allegations into play. It's more about the brand. But, you know, that's how business is at the end of the day. And this is the thing for Red Bull, is that Ford are basically telling them, get your house in order, and if what we're hearing about Horner is true, then he can't possibly stay or we're out of here type thing. And that's the kind of pressure that will force the Thai side of Red Bull into action on this. So it's statements like these that just make it untenable to me that Horner will stay in this post for too much longer, and I'm sure other partners would have a similar assessment. And apparently Red Bull are looking to conclude this investigation quickly. They don't want this to drag on until Bahrain. Horner still turned up to the reveal and still said his piece, and we'll discuss that more so in a second, but there is now a desire, especially after all the reports about the sexually transgressive behaviour coming out in the Dutch media yesterday, that they want to accelerate this process to end the disruption as well as the uncertainty. So we'll see if anything happens about this. This, I will say, is probably the most remarkable update on the Horner saga from last night, however, is that apparently this has been known for some time. This behaviour, this inappropriate, controlling behaviour, as has been described, whatever Horner has been sending this woman, has been occurring for several months. Not just from December, but a long time before that. Apparently so much so. Now, this is all rumours and conjecture and speculation. At least this part is. There's other parts of the story which we have, you know, more outlets supporting. But this is quite remarkable if this is true, and as I say, it may not be. But apparently Red Bull have known about this, and they were offering Horner the chance to get out of the matter without losing face at the end of last year. Apparently there was a plan already prepared. Horner would resign as the team boss of his own free will, and the official reason would have been something around health problems. But Horner did not take up this offer. Now, of course, first of all, you've got to realise that if this is true and Red Bull knew what was happening here, knew that these potential things were going to come to light, and created a plan so that Horner could step away to effectively cover up all these allegations in the situation, that's pretty nasty work out of Red Bull in the first place. Arguably being complicit in the cover-up of these allegations, that would be the implication if that is true. Now, to be fair, we don't know, because the Dutch story, as it's been described to in the media coming out of the Telegraaf from Eric van Haren, apparently Horner is taking legal action against the publication. So, I mean, it's just an absolute mess, isn't it? Now, Van Haren said of the Telegraaf that they had seen the evidence of what was behind this from the Horner allegation side. They had had their lawyers review it and ensure that they had a watertight enough story for them to publish it. But now Horner's going to take legal action against them. So it really is an absolute mess, to be honest. But I imagine it's only going to be a few more days until we have a serious resolution here in place. So Horner was also talking about the Red Bull RB20. But I wanted to say a couple of things on Ferrari, because there's been some leaks here as to how their cars have been getting on. This is actually a side-by-side analysis. Well, not really analysis. It's straight to a video of the Ferrari SF-24 and the Ferrari SF-24 on the right-hand side. So pretty much people videoed them going around the track, and we're calculating how quickly they went around the track, right? Because they're obviously going to push here at Fiorano, their test track that's right next to where they make the cars, and apparently these are the numbers. So Leclerc recorded his best time at a 56.81. It's a short track. There's not really a long enough straight to get up to top speed. It's not especially a representative track of many on the Formula 1 calendar. But nonetheless, these data, if they're true, are very interesting. So Leclerc's fastest time was a 56.8. Sainz's fastest time was a 57.2. Maybe what you might expect, but apparently Leclerc's time was 0.8 a lap faster than what he managed with the SF-24 last year. So we know that Leclerc has said that his first few laps in this year's Ferrari were much, much better than last year's in terms of stability. The car was easier to drive, and that's resulted in an 0.8 a lap improvement this year to last year. Now, there's so many variables in this. There's track conditions, there's temperature on the day. It's one whole year apart. Obviously, it is, to be fair, the same track, but there's so many other factors. You know, what was the fuel load? What was the setup? You know, did they work more on the setup this time than last year? You just don't know. So, you know, you can't really extrapolate too much from this. You might look at 0.8 and say, well, it's only a minute lap and they've gained 0.8. So over a 90-second lap, which is most of the calendar, they'll gain 1.2 seconds. And the rumour was what Jake Dennis said, that if anyone wants to catch the RB20, they will need to gain a second on last year's car performance. And if these numbers are to be believed, Ferrari might not be far off, or they might be on that kind of 1 second gains compared to last year's number. But you know, as I say, it's too much extrapolation to make based on solely information just like this. But nonetheless, that is positive for Ferrari. There's no doubt about it that an 0.8 a second lap improvement year on year is about as good as I think they could reasonably expect given the circumstances. Whether that will, of course, translate into performance when we get to Bahrain. Testing is coming up in just a couple of days' time, and then the Grand Prix the weekend after. We'll see about that. But the Red Bull is almost certainly going to be the car to beat, and for more reasons than we might have initially believed. So Red Bull have made it very clear that they have not been conservative with their car. It's funny, really, because it was only a week or so ago that Adrian Newey was telling the media that he was somewhat fearful they'd been too conservative with their car updates, and it wasn't going to be enough compared to what the other teams were doing. But from what we see on the RB20, there are so many dramatic changes here that it's hard to imagine they could have been any more aggressive, really, in their development, unless they're doing to the Zeropods what we believe they might be doing to the Zeropods. So Horner says at the kind of reveal and around the reveal, and we wonder how many comments we'll get more so from Horner on the RB20 if what has been rumoured is true. There's great innovation on the car as well that no doubt will be scrutinised over the coming couple of weeks, but I think the creativity has been strong in the team, and the belief is that, you know, Red Bull have really pushed the boundaries. We can see the car here with those, you know, sloping shoulders that were most certainly Mercedes inspired. This is the car we saw at the reveal. Now, Red Bull are known full well to quite rarely show their actual car at the launch. They don't usually do it. They usually show last year's car with the new livery on. Of course, the livery is the same, but, you know, they pretend it's new and they, you know, big it up and all this type of stuff. However, this year they did show the car that is actually going to be run, we believe, at Bahrain testing. But that's probably because there's more to come. You know, I don't think they would have shown this version of the car if this wasn't really what they're going to be rocking once the season properly gets underway. So a couple of things to note, of course: the vertical side pod inlets, the shoulders at the back of the car, clearly inspired to some degree by the Mercedes concept. This is a better view, by the way, as well, on that vertical side pod inlet. Craig Scarborough's rumoured there might even be two side pod inlets, one up here, and then this is more of like an S duct, which we don't yet see the outlet for because you don't have to necessarily on the car that you show, but of course the real car would have to have an outlet for this if that is what that indeed is. So we don't really know, and Red Bull are very good at not giving too much away before the season gets underway. But we now have major bombshell reports coming out today from Autosport, and this isn't, you know, the Gazzetta. This isn't like some Italian magazine that's maybe found a story and they're just going to run with it. You know, this is Autosport. This is a very reputable publication, and they are saying the following: that Red Bull are set to unleash a Zeropod style design. We've already seen a few elements the Red Bull have taken from the Mercedes of last year. They're now apparently going to go one step further and even make the Zeropods very similar to what we've seen with Mercedes previously. And this would be incredible if it happens. It's been talked about in the community for a couple of years now, that what if Red Bull took the Zeropod that Mercedes have trialled and actually made it work themselves? Because Mercedes clearly knew that based on their simulations, the Zeropod was generating the most peak downforce. So let's not forget forget, they only unveiled the Zeropod at Bahrain back in 2022, and the rumor was that it was a second a lap faster than their other version because they could generate way more downforce in the simulation testing. Unfortunately, from Mercedes' perspective, their simulations don't reflect the reality of on-track performance, and while the W13 was generating so much downforce in a peak perspective, it couldn't generate that downforce consistently enough to actually drive well at all. The porpoising effect was therefore created in a major way because there was so much downforce being generated, it was porpoising like crazy because they didn't have the control of the mechanical platform. And it feels to me like Mercedes tried to put the cart before the horse. They wanted to generate all the downforce in 2022, but yet they didn't have the stable aerodynamic platform created by the suspension, created by the floor. Newey has gone the other way. He's gone horse before the cart, and over the last couple of years has focused massively on the suspension design, on the floor, in having a stable platform which can generate consistent performance over a lap and appear like it has no weaknesses compared to many other cars of this ground effect era. Now Red Bull are saying, alright, how about we try and generate more downforce? They've got the stable platform, now it's about adding performance, and this is where many of Mercedes' ideas, which were correct in part, but they couldn't properly execute, now come into play. So this is what Autosport say. They understand that this design that we see at the reveal, so this one that you guys see on screen right here, which is, you know, it has elements of the Zeropod, but it's definitely not a Zeropod design. There's clearly a pretty chunky side pod in play there. The belief is they are going to use this only for the hot conditions of pre-season testing, and then Bahrain, Australia, Saudi Arabia. Japan is then, I think, the fourth race of the season, now in early April. Usually it's much later on, but this year they're doing it earlier. And in that kind of ballpark, the temperatures will come down somewhat. And we know that Red Bull last year put a fair bit of effort into improving the cooling systems, repackaging the inside structure of the cars to help with that, because it was a concern Mercedes had to battle with. Mercedes was so confident that a Zeropod was going to generate so much performance. They sacrificed so much to make it happen. In the packaging of the car, in the cooling, in all sorts of other areas, you know, they knew it was probably going to compromise their straight line speed and their drag to some degree because of how they had to package the gearbox and other factors. And now Mercedes are like, well, all right, we've got to roll back on that. Let's remake the new suspension. And it feels like now Mercedes are getting to stage one of, you know, rejigging the suspension. We know they've put the push rod in at the rear of the car, and the side pods have gone back to how, you know, more traditional style. Red Bull are now a whole year or two ahead further down the road on having perfected the concept. Now they can really explore the options that Mercedes arguably tried to explore slightly too early. And when cooling becomes less of a problem, then they will put on a Mercedes size 0 side pod, or at least something which is highly reminiscent of it when temperatures drop, and cooling requirements will be less marginal, and therefore they can, you know, really use this to their advantage. So I guess this can go one of two ways if this is true, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if it is, because by Red Bull showing us this, it makes me think that they've got something else up their sleeve. And there've been some rumours for a little time now, actually, that Red Bull might have been exploring something to exactly this effect. This, of course, if you guys are unfamiliar, is what the Mercedes looked like at the start of 2022, and of course at the start of 2023, with their very slim profile side pods, which almost didn't exist at all. Vertical inlet channel, just as we see on this year's Red Bull, but the side pod was, you know, as good as non-existent. And the Mercedes feeling was that by exposing further elements of the floor and by exposing more floor area, they were able to generate more performance, which they never really managed to actualize. So this goes one of two ways. Either, which is the more likely outcome, Newey and Red Bull have nailed it, and not only do they have the perfect mechanical base, but now they can use this concept to generate way more aerodynamic performance. Are they doing so to effectively embarrass Mercedes? I wouldn't be surprised if there's like 1% of it that's part of it like that. And actually Horner had to address this and says that what they're doing on the rear of the car, these shoulders, shall we say, were not made because, you know, to just take the mick out of Mercedes. They were made because they believe that does give them the most performance, and we'll see if that's true if and when this Zeropod design actually comes into reality, when cooling is slightly less of a concern a few races into the season. At their first major upgrade, they plan to apparently bring around about Japan. And if Red Bull do nail this, then I can't imagine what Total Wolff's fate face is going to look like as and when the Red Bull just runs away, riot, and wins all the races this season with the Zeropod design that Mercedes abandoned. And I don't know what Mike Elliott is thinking this morning. Is he pacing around his room? Is he punching the air? Like, is this guy fuming because effectively he lost his job for sticking with the sidepod concept as it was, at least to some degree? And although James Allison always said that, you know, it wasn't really about the sidepod design why the car was bad, but they still reverted the sidepod design, but they still felt that it was better for them to go back to a more traditional undercut model that everybody else has done, including Red Bull. But now apparently Red Bull have decided something else. Of course, Mercedes then changed their concept to look like this, much more traditional sidepod, and now, well, Red Bull are going the entirely other way. So either this is a masterstroke from Newey and Red Bull, which is the more likely outcome. Option 2, however, is that actually there is more to this than meets the eye, and Red Bull are kind of somewhat like Icarus, and they're flying too close to the sun. They're trying to really chase perfection, whereas the reality potentially is that there are more problems associated with the Zeropod that Mercedes now realise, and the reason why they went away from it, than Red Bull are currently able to experience. George Russell said a couple of times while they were going through this development that there were traps that the other teams would fall into if they, you know, when they go down a similar route, shall we say. And apparently Mercedes understood those traps and therefore steered clear over the last couple of years. Red Bull, who knows? Are their simulations correlating perfectly to their on-track performance? Sure, and to be fair, if the Zeropod doesn't work, can they just go back to what they showed at the launch car and still have the best car? Probably, to be honest. But it would be fascinating if Red Bull were to put this on the car and all of a sudden some sort of simulation correlation errors that Mercedes suffered with big time in their first couple of years start to occur. And then it would really raise the question as to whether Red Bull have, you know, done this for the intention of making Toto Wolff really frustrated and embarrassed to some degree, or whether they've done this because it really is the way to generate maximum aerodynamic performance. So a fascinating development, of course, if this turns out to be true, and if Newey and Washe and these boys have really cooked up a Zeropod that's actually going to work. And as I say, I can't imagine what Toto Wolff's face is going to look like as and where that would be the case. And imagine how smug Christian Horner would look if he's still in charge over there, which he probably isn't at this rate. But yeah, I can't imagine the level of trash talk and stuff like that that would be going down at Japan if they go there with a Zeropod and dominate the Grand Prix by 30 plus seconds. So very much interested in your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.